So, welcome to the local energy advocates meeting in October 2025. Today, our speaker is Laura Davis, who is a let's see. I'll let you explain exactly where you are and all that. But I know Laura from Mothers Out Front. She used to be a volunteer leader, then was on staff, and has a very creative mind and a determined way of going about changing the world. So, Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Andra. I am a little hard to define. So I live out in Petersham, which is in the North Quabbin area. I work at the local library. I'm new to this North Quabbin region, though. My husband grew up here, but we lived closer to Boston for many years, for about 10 years. Most of the presentation, most of the pictures that you'll see are from when we lived closer to the city. And it's important to say that right up front because I use my e-bike a lot less out in North Quabbin than I did when I was living in a more dense area. I used to live in Concord, Massachusetts, which is definitely not urban, but definitely not rural. It's a very suburban community. And that community is about 5 miles end to end. So almost anything that I got to, that I needed was within the town of Concord. Before I get started, I wanted to make that clear. So this is eBikes 101, the People's Guide to Pedal Assist. I did this presentation at the Garlic and Arts Festival a little while ago, which is where Andra saw me and invited me to come present to you all. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience with e-bikes and about the relevance that I see e-bikes having as we work on building a more just and sustainable transportation system. Um, and so with that, I'll get started. Let's hope I can advance these. Let's see. All right. So how it started. My husband and I met when we were in college. He was a semi-professional cyclist who rode his bicycle a whole lot. And I am an asthmatic who has never been athletic a day in my life. And so I did not ride a bicycle. I rode a bicycle maybe twice a year under duress. It was not something I enjoyed doing. And what was funny is that, I was a real, environmentalist. I cared a lot about climate change. Um, and yet I never rode my bike to work, to the store, even though I often lived within biking distance of those things. And my husband, who rode sometimes 80 miles in a day, also did not ride to the train station or the store, which was very much within his biking distance, because he saw biking as an athletic pursuit, a recreational activity that required special shoes and special clothes and a special bicycle that was very expensive. And he didn't want to lock that up. So this is how it started. We both had reasons to want to bike, but we didn't bike for practical reasons, for different reasons. Um, so we had an experiment. My husband said, our son is starting preschool. Preschool is 3.5 miles, a little more than 3 miles away from our house. It's the perfect biking distance. I was just about to have to buy a new car, and this was during the chip shortage in 2021. And my husband said, these e-bikes are getting really good. I think that you might really enjoy riding an e-bike to preschool every day with our kiddo. So we went to a bike store in Somerville and we test rode this bicycle that's in the picture here. And I got on the bike and I rode it around the block and I was like, oh my God, I had no idea the biking could be this fun. I didn't realize that I didn't have to die every time I went up a hill. Um, and so it was a real revelatory experience. I had heard about e-bikes for a long time, but I had never ridden one. And as soon as I got on one, I was like, oh, this is not what I expected, and it's way better. So we bought the e-bike. I ended up giving up my car 2 weeks later. My lease ended, and I gave up the car. And I thought, maybe we'll buy a car when it gets cold. And we did not buy a car until we moved to Petersham. So we were a single car family in a suburban area for many years. So life by bike. I'm going to talk primarily about biking for practical purposes. I don't bike for recreation. almost ever. All of my biking is practical to go to the grocery store, to go to the post office, to go to the drugstore. When I lived closer to Boston, we did all of our grocery shopping, all of our preschool pickup and drop off. We went to the CSA pickup. We went out for date nights on a bike. My husband went to the bus stop in the morning by bike. And so we really found that it was much more practical than we initially thought. We thought it was just going to be for school drop off, and it ended up being for everything. The bike that we purchased is a large style cargo bike. They're very common in Europe and they're gaining popularity in Massachusetts, especially. This bike can carry up to 550 pounds, including the weight of the rider. So I really can carry anything. We had a special recycling day at the at the transfer station. And so this was that experience. I did this every year. This year it happened to be pouring when we did it. Um, so very practical for all sorts of things. I don't think I would have been able to get that into our car, honestly, the plastic play structure. And it would have been a mess if we had gotten into the car. So the little trips really did add up. School, work. My husband would, trip chain, go to the bus stop and get on the bus to go into Boston. Um, we did food shopping, we went to the library, also play dates and, neighborhood potlucks, anything that was nearby. Even if you don't live in a super dense community, there are things that you end up doing within your community that you might find you can do by bike, even if your dentist and doctor don't are not within 5 miles of you. So when I say that they really add up, I mean that they really added up. In 2023, combined between my husband and I, we rode 4,000 miles, over 4,000 miles in the year 2023. I tracked my mileage we're big data people in our household. My husband's a scientist, so we tracked our mileage every month. And I'll give you some more stats about how much electricity we used and how much money we spent at the end. But in 2023, just all of those little errands and all those little trips and those date nights, they added up to a heck of a lot of transportation over the course of a year. So I'm not talking about like a couple of miles a year. I'm talking, it can be for some people, not everybody, but for some people, it can be a very significant portion of their transportation. So what is an e-bike? Just going back to basics here, if you're not familiar with e-bikes, an electric bicycle has a legal definition. There are things that are e-bikes and there are things that are not e-bikes. So an e-bike has 2 or 3 wheels. If it has 4 wheels, it's not an e-bike. It has operable pedals. This is really important. If you see a small electric vehicle that has no pedals, that is a motorcycle or a moped. It is not an e-bike. It has to have operable pedals. It has a small electric motor, and there is a max to that. And it has a speed governor, which means that the motor will stop working when you reach a certain speed. That doesn't mean that you can't go faster on the e-bike, just like any bike. If you're going downhill, you're going to go faster than 28 miles an hour, just like you would on any bike. But the motor will stop helping you either at 20 miles an hour or at 28 miles an hour, depending on what type of e-bike you have. How do e-bikes work? There are 2 ways that they can help you. E-bikes can amplify the rider's natural pedaling effort. So it uses the energy from the motor to enhance what you are putting into the bicycle. So as you pedal, it's matching your energy, and that's called pedal assist. And all e-bikes have pedal assist. I often talk about it as like sharing. So sometimes I put it into a high level of assistance and the bike is giving me 80% while I give it 20%. So it's taking a lot of the effort off of me, but I still have to move my feet and pedal the bicycle in order for it to move forward. Or you can ride it in a low mode where it's giving you 20% and you're putting in 80%, so you're still getting a pretty good workout. This is a great visual for like what it feels like to have pedal assist. If you don't have any pedal assist, your head is down, you're working really hard, and if you have a motor helping you, you can be upright, you can be talking, having a conversation, and still get up the hill. You're not going to go up the hill super fast. You might be going 8 miles an hour, but you're going to be able to get up the hill without expending a lot of energy. I will say that I did not take this picture. I do not endorse riding an e-bike without a helmet or shoes. Please wear a helmet and shoes. It's just a good example of what it feels like. So there's also a throttle. Some e-bikes, not all e-bikes, have a throttle. And a throttle can be a lever, as it is in this picture. It can also be a button. It can sometimes be a twist grip. And that would allow you to propel the bike forward without actually pedaling. You're still going to have the pedals. You can still ride it in pedal assist mode, but you also have a throttle. And not all e-bikes have a throttle. Some people will say, well, that's cheating. You know, you shouldn't be able to ride a bike if you're not pedaling. And the thing I always say is, I know a lot of people who buy throttle assist bikes because they have knee problems or they have hip problems. And they didn't ride a bike because they would maybe get halfway through their ride and then something would flare up and they would need to call somebody to get them home. So for some people, it's an accessibility tool. It can also really help people who are unsteady because you can use a throttle to get yourself going. So you can have your feet on the ground, you can get the bike moving, and then you can pick your feet up and put them on the pedals. So I personally don't like a throttle. I don't like the way that throttle bikes feel when I ride them. But for some people, a throttle is a huge accessibility tool, and I'm all for that. How fast do e-bikes go? This is how much assisted speed you can achieve. So this is how much the motor will help you achieve. For a class one or a class two bicycle, it's 20 miles an hour. Once you hit 20 miles an hour, that motor's going to cut out. And unless you're headed downhill or you're really working, you're not going any faster than 20 miles an hour. And for class three bikes, it'll go up to 28 miles an hour. I often tell people that I think class threes are overkill. But there are some people who really need a class three. I'd say that the only reason I might buy a class three is if I was commuting on a road where the speeds were really high and I was trying to keep up with the traffic for my own safety. But for me, I think 20 miles an hour is plenty. And I think for most people, 20 miles an hour is plenty. I want to make this very clear. If the motor makes the bike go faster than 28 miles an hour, it's not an e-bike anymore. There are things that are modified so that they go faster than that. That's no longer legally an e-bike. So you no longer have the same rights and responsibilities as a cyclist if your motor is going faster than 28 miles an hour. Then you're riding a moped or a motorcycle, and there are different rules for those vehicles. So three classes of electric bicycles, I alluded to this, but just to give a little bit more clarity about this, a class one bike has pedal assist, they all do, does not have a throttle, and the max speed is 20 miles an hour. Class two bikes, they have pedal assist, they also have a throttle, and they also go 20 miles an hour with the motor. And then a class three bicycle typically has pedal assist, but no throttle and goes a little bit faster. And as I said, those are often marketed towards commuters that have long distances to cover and might be on very fast roads. E-bikes come in all shapes and sizes. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. But obviously, we have bikes that look just like bikes. And sometimes the batteries are very well integrated. You sometimes don't even notice that it is an e-bike because the batteries might be small and integrated into the frame. These are awesome for light errands. They're great for commuting. They're great for recreation or occasional use. They're also great if you have a tight budget because you can often find like a pretty normal looking e-bike. And then you can add accessories to it to make it more practical for errands. There are mountain bikes, there are e-mountain bikes. Now that I've moved out to Peter Sam, I have a new appreciation for e-mountain bikes because there are some very rough dirt roads around here that I can ride instead of riding on fast country roads. So I'm now starting to think that I'd like to have a more beefy suspension in order to go through those dirt roads. Lots of folks are also finding that they're useful for hunting and farming, and obviously for recreation. People love to get out into the woods with them. There are folding bikes, and folding bikes can be very small. As you can see here, this is the folding electric Brompton. And these are great for multimodal travel. You can bring them on Amtrak trains. You can bring them on any MBTA commuter train. You can only bring a full-size bike on some trains, the sort of midday trains and the late night trains. But you can bring a folding electric bicycle on peak trains. So my husband actually does go into the city once a week and he takes a folding electric bicycle from Wachusett Station so that he can go from the train station to his office. So this is great for multimodal. It's also great for small apartments if somebody doesn't have a place to store a bike, but they want to have an e-bike. Great if they want to be able to get it into the back of a small car. And great if where they're living or where they're commuting to regularly has security concerns and no place to store bikes. These are really easy to bring into your office and store underneath your desk. So there's a lot of versatility in folding bikes. The downside is they're very expensive. And they don't take potholes well. You have to be very careful on the potholy roads with the folding bikes with the tiny wheels. Then there's cargo bikes, which is what I have mostly ridden, and it's just great for hauling anything. Kids, you can get ones that will take an adult passenger. Our bucket bike will take an adult passenger. Groceries, pets, sometimes people buy them specifically for their dogs. You can really take anything, as previously shown with my dump picture. Um, these box style cargo bikes are sometimes called bakfiets. That's the Dutch way of talking about them. Or a box bike is sometimes how they're marketed in the US. This is a tricycle that you see on the right here. That's made by an American company called Bunch. And you can see this one is made by Trek. More and more companies, even the legacy, recreation bike companies are starting to come out with these bakfiets bikes because they're so practical for families. There are also trikes and recumbents. The trikes, I'm finding that a lot of seniors are turning towards trikes because they offer great stability. If you're having any kind of balance issues, they're excellent for that. You just have to take them slow around corners. I always want to say that. Recumbents are also great for people who have certain accessibility needs, although I do see these mostly as recreational vehicles. Most people use them for that. Hard to store cargo if you're down on the ground already. But I may be wrong. I'm happy to be proved wrong on recumbents. They may have more practical value than I'm giving them credit for. So I often talk about e-bikes as the other electric vehicle. There are a lot of people who an EV is not in their price range at the moment. They have a car that they're happy with. They're not going to change anytime in the next couple years. But they could reduce the amount that they use a gas-powered car if they got an e-bike and just started to use that for short distance trips. Um, so I like to go to the EV drive events with the e-bikes and say, this is the other EV that you could look into. It's a little bit less expensive if an EV is not in your immediate future. So here are some practical tips for biking from somebody who has spent a lot of time on e-bikes. Everybody wants to know about charging. It's not as complicated as charging an electric vehicle. This is the charger. I actually have it in front of me to give you scale. This is the charger. It just plugs into a regular wall outlet. Um, and then this is the whole battery for my bikes. Batteries often look different, but they're not very big. Um, there are some safety tips for charging. The first is that you should never use an extension cord and you must always use the charging cord that came with your bike and your bike battery. Or if something happens to that when you go back to your manufacturer and you get the same charger. A lot of the e-bike battery fires that you hear about have been caused by people using extension cords or using um, not the right charging cords, not the original charging cords that came with their bicycles. Also, you wouldn't want to leave it plugged in all the time. You want to, charge it and then leave it unplugged. And for my batteries, which are 500 watts, it takes 4.5 hours to go from 0 to full. And a full battery on my really big and heavy bike will take me about 22 miles. On my compact cargo bike, it'll take me 70 miles. So it depends very much on how much weight you're dragging around, how much cargo you're carrying. So yes, this is how far it could go. How far can you go? The answer is usually it depends. It depends on the bike. It depends on how cold it is outside. If it's really cold, you'll go a little bit. Um, you won't go as far on a charge. Terrain matters. If you're doing really hilly areas, you're going to lose some of your range. Um, and then also how much you're carrying. So when I'm carrying my son, I get a little bit less range than if it's just me. Riding in winter is something that people ask me about as somebody who rode a bike year round. Some of the things that I found very helpful if you are planning to ride year round is studded snow tires. We got these for our cargo bike, and it was fabulous for sticking to the road. It did reduce our range a little bit, but not significantly. Um, Other things that I find very helpful for riding both in the winter and at night are really obnoxiously reflective clothing. You can see here I use this is the actual rain jacket that I use. It's from Showers Pass. It's very reflective. I look like a ghost on the road, and I think you can't be reflective enough if you're riding around sunset or at night. The lobster mittens are great if you're doing winter riding, as well as bar mitts, which are sort of these uh, insulated an insulated pocket that you can put your hands into. It goes over your handlebars. And then if you have a cargo bike and you're hauling around kids, most cargo bikes have an accessory you can purchase that protects them from weather, and that's awesome for winter because it blocks all of the wind chill, and that's very significant. Also base layers. I mean, we're in New England. I'm sure everybody wears base layers in the winter. And then a hot water bottle for my son when I put him in the cargo compartment. So, an e-bike is not right for everybody. You know, not everybody, it doesn't make sense for everybody's life, but I do believe that a lot more people would benefit from riding e-bikes, would be able to drive less. So if you want to drive less, if you want to add easy exercise into your daily routine, if you love spending time outdoors, if you struggle to find parking either where you live or places that you visit frequently, school pickup lines are the scourge of American public schools. So you can skip the whole school pickup line saga if you have a cargo bike. And obviously, if you want to reduce pollution from cars, riding an e-bike is a great way of doing all of these things simultaneously. And I'll say that I really started riding for the climate and pollution reasons, and I have continued to ride because of the exercise benefits, because of the convenience of being able to pull up right next to my destination, the joy of being outside with my son all the time. Those are the reasons that I actually continue riding. So if somebody is considering an e-bike, the thing that I say is ride as many bikes as you can. If you see a bike store when you're out and about, just go in and ask if they have an e-bike that you can test ride, even if you have no intention of buying one that day. There are sometimes test ride events. There are fewer out in Western Mass. There are lots in Boston. But you can look up if there will be any test ride events, especially in the spring. And go to places where they have e-bikes as part of their bike share program and try them out there. Just make sure to bring a helmet with you. Ride as many different styles as you can because you might not realize, oh, I don't like the way that this bike feels. That may just be because it has a throttle or because it has a small wheel or something like that. So just try as many different styles as you can until you find the right fit for you. And if you can, I always recommend that you borrow an e-bike either from a shop or from a friend and bring it home with you and ride some of the routes that you think that you might ride frequently before you commit to buying an e-bike because it is a huge expense. And so you want to make sure that it really makes sense for you before you commit to that. And I will say most e-bike owners are real excited about their bikes and would probably be very happy to lend you the bike for a weekend. So if you have a friend with an e-bike, I would make the ask. There are some places you can rent within the state of Massachusetts. Boston Blue Bikes obviously has e-bikes, but there's actually a new startup called Cargo B that rents out these Bachfiets style bikes as a bike share. This is a new company that started within the last year. So if you're curious about Bachfiets bikes and you want to rent one for an hour next time you're in Boston, that's an option. The Valley obviously has e-assist bikes, so that's a great place to try them out. And Worcester also has they recently restarted their e-bike sharing program. So lots of options for when you're out and about in Massachusetts and you want to try a bike. If you are thinking about buying a bike, I recommend buying from a bike shop. The most important thing is to find a quality bike that is safe and repairable. And if you're buying from a bike shop, that means that bike shop is standing behind that product and saying, this is a bike that I would be willing to work on, that I would be willing to fix, that I don't think is going to break on you in the first year. So if you can buy from a bike shop, avoid really cheap bikes. I had a very sweet teenager come up to me at the Garlic and Arts Festival and ask if I could recommend a bike that was around $200 on Amazon. And I said, do not buy a $200 bike on Amazon. It will burn your family's house down. Um, you really need to look for a quality bicycle. When we talk about these bike fires that people are very afraid of, these are often happening with direct market, low quality, untested products that are being shipped straight from China. So you want to look for a UL tested product. This is the UL logo. So that means that it has gone through rigorous testing, it is meeting the safety requirements, and it's not going to catch on fire. So that's super important. So if I've convinced you and you're gone out to buy a bike and you have a bike, a few words of wisdom, I hope. I hope they're wise. Um, Start with short, easy rides. If you are not already a cyclist, if you're a confident cyclist, you can ignore these. But if you're like me and you weren't riding regularly before, start with short, easy rides. Practice riding in low stress areas. So bring your bike to a bike trail and start there. Don't start on the busy road that you're afraid of. And ride when you can with more experienced riders. Join a group ride. If you can find a class, sometimes you can find a class that will help build your confidence. Join Facebook groups. There are lots of Facebook groups for e-bike owners and riders. That's a great place to get tips and tricks from other riders. And make biking a habit. I know that a lot of people go out and they buy an e-bike with great intentions, and then it sits in the back of their garage for years. They don't even take it out for the season. And that is something that we want to avoid. If you're gonna spend the money and use the resources to get an e-bike, make sure that you're really going to use it. So I say make it effortless. I used to park my bike in front of my car. So in order for me to get my car out of the garage, I had to move the bicycle. So it was actually easier to just get on the bicycle and get out the garage that way. So park it front and center, especially for the first couple weeks that you own it, and keep all your gear right next to the front door. Don't keep it in the basement or the back of the pantry where you're gonna have to like find it every time. You want to make it as effortless as it is to get in your car. Make it easier than that. Also make it delightful. I think that building that habit when you first get the bike is really important. So like commit to meeting a friend for coffee at a coffee shop you can buy two from your house once a week for the first month. That'll help you like break the ice of getting on the bike and doing something practical with it. I like a speaker with tunes, but obviously be mindful of your neighbors and be a good neighbor and don't blast them too loud. A few resources that I think are useful to know about is that People for Bikes and the League of American Cyclists worked together to put together this e-bike smart online course. So this is a series of videos that you can watch. It will teach you all that you need to know about e-bikes, about e-bike charging safety, about rules of the road, a lot of great refreshers if you are not a confident everyday cyclist already. I think everybody who's buying an e-bike should check this out. A word about teenagers on bicycles. Teens must be at least 16 to legally operate an e-bike in the state of Massachusetts. A lot of parents don't know this. So this is one of my goals with my advocacy is to tell parents like you're supposed to wait until your kid is 16 to get them an e-bike. This is in large part because they don't know the rules of the road. You know, they need to be taught. We don't have good cycling education in the United States, and so teens are very ill prepared for getting on a bike and going around their community. So, I think that as much education as we can give kids about riding safely as possible is fabulous. There is an e-bike training for teens that you can go online and do. Unfortunately, you have to pay money for it. It's about $35, I think. Some schools in California have started to offer it to high school students. And so I think the more that we can incorporate cycling education into our school system is fabulous, because we don't have a good cycling culture in this country. And the more that we can build a shared language about how we interact with each other in public spaces when some of us are on bicycles and some of us aren't is fabulous. Some challenges and barriers. Not everybody can and ride a bike, and there are lots of reasons for that, and I do want to address some of those things briefly. So cost, storage, weight, and infrastructure. Those are the ones that come up the most when I talk to people about e-bikes. E-bikes are very expensive. As I said, you do not want to buy a $200 bike on Amazon. I usually tell people don't expect to spend less than $1,000. And if you want to get a really nice bike, you're looking more like $3,000. So it can be very expensive. There, this summer they did have an e-bike voucher program. Unfortunately, it has ended for the year, and I don't have updated information about when they might reopen applications for this program. But for low and moderate income residents, you had to be qualified to apply. You could qualify for vouchers from $800 to $1,200 towards the purchase of an e-bike that you purchased through a bike shop. So not one you bought online, but you had to go through a bike shop. They also allowed for some additional spending around accessories so people could get helmets and locks. And that was awarded via a lottery process. So if you met all the qualifications, then you were randomly selected through a lottery. Um, One of the things I said about cost is if you look for a more basic bike, sometimes you can get better deals that way. I love my cargo bikes, but they tend to run really expensive. The big Bach bikes are really, they start at $5,000 and go up from there. So some practical biking tips is they make really great grocery trailers that turn any bicycle into a great little cargo bike. This flatbed trailer that I have is fabulous. That's very versatile. I can take a 10 by 10 pop-up tent and two folding tables to the farmer's market on that flatbed trailer, which is pretty fabulous. And you don't have to buy super fancy panniers. There are lots of great tutorials online for DIY panniers out of old shopping bags or 5-gallon buckets or all sorts of interesting things. So there are lots of creative ways that you can save money and still have a really practical bike that you can do everyday things on. Storage is also a challenge, especially for folks who are in more urban environments. A little bit less of a problem if you're out in a rural area. You can buy some backyard sheds. That's a great way of keeping your bike contained and protected from the elements. Um, a cover is a really great, inexpensive way of reducing the chance of your bike being stolen. There's a wonderful cargo bike advocate and owner who lives in Manhattan and has a big Bachfeets like my big cargo bike, and she parks it on the street in Manhattan. She just uses really good locks and a cover, and makes sure to park it in places that are within the view of the public. So if somebody did try to start stealing it, somebody would see. So you have to be practical about where you're parking it, but it is possible to park it even if you don't have a backyard or a garage. One creative thing is if you do have, some space on your property, maybe in your backyard, but you don't have a shed or a garage, some people will actually install a ground mount that you might install if you were going to have a motorcycle, so you can lock it to the ground anywhere. So if you have like a concrete pad in your backyard, that's a great option. So those are some creative storage solutions. Obviously, the biggest challenge in the United States with biking is our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is almost entirely designed for car drivers. And so there are lots of places where it feels really unsafe to ride a bicycle. And I think that's the biggest challenge for folks anywhere in the United States. My husband was very much in the highly confident side of the spectrum, because he had been riding recreationally on normal roads for a very long time. I was in the interested but concerned category when I started riding a bike, and it took me a long time to build my confidence enough to ride on the roads that he rides on. So I think that the biggest thing as advocates, since I'm speaking to a group of advocates, is advocating for infrastructure that makes it much more possible for people who are in this left-hand interested but concerned category to start biking. This is why I think that bike paths and bike lanes are so important, especially bike paths and bike lanes that get people to practical destinations, not just recreational trails that go off into the woods, but things that will get them into the center of town, to schools, to those destinations that are going to help them incorporate biking into their daily lives. This is like my favorite cartoon to illustrate our infrastructure problem in the United States. There will be some people who are like, this is fine. You could totally bike here. And there are lots of people who are just like, no, you're insane. Absolutely not. Not going to put my kid on a bicycle and bike down that road. That is very dangerous. So the more infrastructure that we can build that gets everybody biking, people of all ages and abilities, the better we are as a society. So cycling for a healthier planet. I got into this because I was a climate advocate and I was very interested in reducing my emissions personally. And as I said, I am a data person. So I'm going to throw some numbers at you here. So transportation really matters. I try to allocate my advocacy efforts and also my personal energy about my emissions personally by what makes the biggest difference. And transportation is about 29%. This is our US emissions. So looking at the country as a whole, it's 29% of our national emissions portfolio. So this is almost a third on the national level. If you look at the state level, it's about a third. If you look on most municipal levels, it's about a third. If you look at most households, it's about a third. So I try to spend about a third of my effort thinking about transportation and how to reduce my emissions from that sector because it's about a third of where our emissions come from. So pounds of greenhouse gas emissions per mile. This graph, I want to be very clear, assumes that 100% of your electricity comes from natural gas. So this is the worst case scenario where all of your electricity is being produced by fossil fuels, because a lot of the arguments that we get around, um, you know, whether EVs make sense is because of where the electricity comes from. So this is just talking about the emissions saved by switching to electric mode. So going from a Subaru Outback, which is what we had as our car uh before we switched to an EV recently, going down to a Chevy Bolt was a huge improvement. And we have solar panels on our house, so most of our electricity is actually coming from solar, so that bar is actually quite small. But even if all of your electricity is coming from natural gas, if you switch to an e-bike, it almost eliminates your emissions from transportation. So there's real savings to be had in terms of pollution to switching from a gas powered or even an electric powered uh, large vehicle to something super small and efficient. So as I said, in 2023, we did a little over 4,000 miles on my husband and I together on our e-bikes. We used about 90 kilowatt hours of electricity over that entire year. So this is for all 4,000 miles. And we spent about $9.03, and that's including all the fees. So that was a very large chunk of our transportation for the entire year, cost less than we would have for a couple of gallons of gas at the pump. So that was awesome. We did not burn 189 gallons of gas, and we had a Subaru Outback at the time. So this is actually what we would have burned if we had had to drive to school and to the bus station. These were actual gallons of gas not burned in our vehicle because we were riding our bikes instead. And we saved $650 from not purchasing that gasoline that we didn't burn. I'm, as I said, a data person, so I kept track of our electricity for that year. We had home solar, so most of our electricity was coming from solar. Um, so very little of our electricity was actually coming from the grid. Um, Pounds of emissions avoided. So by opting to use our e-bikes instead of our gas-powered car, we saved 3,700 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide equivalencies. And this is a very abstract number. It's hard to put it into perspective. So this is equivalent to the carbon that you can sequester with 2 acres of mature US forest in 1 year. So when we talk about transportation emissions, we are talking about very large quantities of carbon dioxide. This is, a relatively small amount when we're talking about transportation on a municipal level. But for my family, like I could not have planted or conserved 2 acres of trees on our, like we didn't have that property to conserve, so this was a very significant way to reduce our own personal contribution to climate emissions. And so if you scale that up and you say, okay, everybody in my town is going to, we're going to make it easier for, a significant portion of our community to start using active transportation instead of their vehicles for some of these local trips, you can really start to see the savings when it comes to the climate pollution. So as I said, we started riding our bikes because of the climate emissions piece of it, because we wanted to reduce that 1/3 of our carbon emissions. But really, the reason that we keep doing it is because of this gentle, consistent exercise that we get to incorporate into our day. We just add a few minutes to every trip that we take, and we get to have time outside, moving our bodies. The social connections are a really unexpected joy of riding an e-bike around the community. I know my neighbors so much better than I would have if I had been driving a car. You can think of how hard it is to stop and have a conversation with somebody when you're driving past them. But on a bike, if somebody's outside raking their leaves, you stop, you have a 3-minute conversation, you feel more connected to them, and you're still on your way, and you didn't block traffic in the meantime. The financial savings are obviously fantastic. And especially as costs of everything else go up, it's nice to know that we can reduce some of our household costs by switching more of our miles to our e-bikes. We always get the best parking spots, which is like so satisfying to be able to pull right up next to town meeting and park right next to the front doors instead of having to park the way back of the, high school parking lot. And it's just really, really fun. We often talk, like we would often invent little errands to do just so that we could go and clear our head on the bike, for 20 minutes. And we came back and we were like, well, I picked up that prescription, but really it was about the mental health break. 20 minutes of riding a bike was a great way to clear your head if you were having a rough day. So yeah, so there are lots of side benefits. Even if you don't care about the emissions at all, there are all sorts of side benefits to active transportation. And with that, I will open it up for questions, and thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you, Laura. Such a great presentation, and you give it so clearly and energetically. Thank you. Um, so we have some questions. Tom has been keeping track of his questions in the chat. So let's take one from Tom, and then we'll take one from other people. So choose your question, Tom, and unmute.
Yes, thanks. Again, Laura, amazing effervescence and enthusiasm that you're showing. I also own an e-bike, a Trek supercommuter, and one of the things that I would suggest adding to your recommendations is have people um, test what it's like to ride the bike without battery assist. Then, just in case, which is what I happened to me, I ran out of battery power and I knew what it was going to feel like because I had done it, ahead of time. Just because these things weigh a lot usually. And my question for you is, in terms of getting more affordable, do you have any experience with the sodium ion batteries to power bikes now? Because that's the next wave that I've seen.
I would love to learn more about that. I don't have more information about that, but I'd be happy to. If you have any information, feel free to email it
I
to me.
put a link in the chat to
Right.
something that I was aware of.
Yeah, I mean, the battery technology is constantly evolving. We have a lot of innovation in this sector, which is a good thing. So most of the bike companies right now are using lithium ion batteries.
Right.
And they're UL certified. As long as you're getting one that is UL certified and made by a
Hmm.
reputable company, I think that that's a good product. But I'm sure that we're going to see more and more innovation as things progress. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Darcy, you had a question?
Yeah, I loved your presentation, Laura. And I, I also had an e-bike for a while, and it was a while back, and the reason that I sold it is because it was heavy, and I had trouble controlling it and mounting and dismounting, and start getting it going on the bottom of a hill. And I know that there have been a lot of, in the last 10 years, I know there have been a lot of improvements. So, as a 75-year-old, when I think about like where would I go, how would I negotiate all the new roundabouts in Amherst? We have all these new roundabouts, and um, they're scary to me with my car. So do you do you have any tips about roundabouts or mounting and dismounting? I think I might end up getting one of those tricycles instead of a bicycle. But
Yeah. You had a
um,
lot of great questions in there. I can take them kind of one at a time. Mounting and dismounting, I think, is huge. I am a big advocate for the step-through bicycle. If I feel like the older generation, not so much my generation, but when I talk to the older generations, they're like, "Oh, like girls' bikes." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess."
yeah.
But those the ones that come down in the middle instead of the ones that have a big bar across the top. I think low step throughs, there are a lot of e-bikes out there that are low step throughs. I think because they know that there are a lot of seniors riding them and a lot of parents riding them. And for me, as a parent who's often got like a kid that I'm balancing in my bike, that low step through is essential for me. I want to be able to mount and dismount my bicycle really easily. Look for ultra low step bicycles. I have been shopping with my parents and my in-laws for bikes. One of the bikes that I'm going to go and test ride with my mom is called the NBD, like the No Big Deal, by Turn, which is one that is sort of, I think it's designed with seniors in mind in particular. It's a very low step. It's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit more petite and compact. So I think it's meant to be a little bit more maneuverable. I have not ridden it myself, but I do have another turn bike that I really love. So you can check on that and then just go into bike shops, ask what their lowest step through bike is. Um, uh, like I said, a throttle for some people can be helpful for starting. I have a friend who has 3 kids, and so she puts 3 kids in her bike. So you can imagine getting that started at the bottom of a hill would be almost impossible without a throttle. So for her, having a throttle on her cargo bike is really important. Also, since I was not a cyclist, I didn't know this trick. So if you're an experienced cyclist and you're like, oh, everybody knows that. It's not necessarily true, but you have to downshift all the way as you're coming to a stop. If you're going to start at the bottom of a hill or if you're going to start on an incline, you know, ratcheting down so you're in a low gear to start with, and then bringing your pedal up so that you can push it down. The pedal power position is how I've heard it referred to sometime. You bring your pedal up so when you get started, you're putting your body weight down on your pedal. That can help you go. I don't have a throttle on my cargo bike, so when I have a fully loaded cargo bike, I'm using all of those little tricks to get me started. So those are some tips. Also, test ride some tricycles. You might find that a tricycle is the right choice for you. Um, for roundabouts and for riding on the road in general, um, as a cyclist, you have the right to take the lane whenever you feel like you need to for your safety. That is, sometimes I carry around a copy of the Massachusetts driving manual and I have that part highlighted. So if a driver ever gets in my face about it, I can be like, have you read the manual in the last 25 years? Um, but you can take the lane. And in the case of coming to a roundabout, I take a lane. I like that is not a moment where I want another car trying to navigate around me in a roundabout. The point of a roundabout is to keep the traffic slow. So you are using the roundabout as it was designed if you're doing that. Um, so I am not a certified cycling instructor. You could also direct that to a certified cycling instructor, which you can find through Mass Bike. But I would say that's a situation where a lot of cyclists might take the lane. The other thing is that if there's an intersection where you're like, I feel really uncomfortable at this intersection, the beautiful thing about a bicycle is that you can step off the bicycle and become a pedestrian at any moment. So there was one intersection that I did not feel comfortable biking through for like a year. So I would just go off to the side, get off my bicycle, get onto the sidewalk and wait as a pedestrian and cross on foot. And then once I got to the other side, get back on my bicycle and go. You don't have to ride through scary intersections. Be a pedestrian when that feels like the safest choice. I just don't recommend like riding in pedestrian, like there are moments where you won't want to be on your bicycle on the sidewalk. That's not always appropriate. But use your pedestrian rights whenever you feel like you need to.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Hmm.
Go to
Um,
Tom's Bank in the chat.
yeah, Tom, you want to ask one of
I,
your
I
other
can I
questions?
can go again. I was just going to place another comment in the chat related to bike safety. One thing a friend of mine showed me was to take one of those swimming noodles and attach it to the back rack and have it stick out on your left-hand side
Mm,
about 3 feet. And that way it gives the cars a visual to
hmm,
stay away from you. I used it for one trip out to Hudson, New York, and it was amazing how much people pulled out and kept away from me. The other question I had was, do you think it's really an e-bike if the electric motors are working and it's not a pedal assist? Because I've been on the Northampton bike path and there's been people that go by me. It's like they're on a motorcycle because they're not pedaling, they're going. Okay, even if they're going 20, that's moving when you're going by someone walking or something. And it just seems to me that the regulations there, I'm a little confused by.
mm,
I always say regulate the behavior, not the technology. So
Mhm.
if you're on a bike, I mean, I think e-bikes should be allowed on bike paths because the
mm,
I as a mom I can't ride a regular bike with my child in it. I don't have the athletic ability or the stamina to ride a regular bike with my child in it. I can ride an e-bike with my child in it, and I am the most polite human on a bike path ever. Like I'm giving signals and I'm slowing down. I think that we can build a really great inclusive culture on our bike paths that include e-bikes because the people who are riding e-bikes are often parents, they're often seniors, they're often young people. And although there are problems with teens on e-bikes, just because they have a motor doesn't mean they are suddenly more protected from being killed by a motor vehicle. And that is why we build separated cycling and pedestrian infrastructure is so that cyclists and pedestrians are not killed by motor vehicles. So I think that we need to build the culture that we want to see on the bike path, not by telling people who need an assistive device that they're not allowed on those places, but to say, hey, we have a speed limit. Hey, we have some rules about signaling before you pass. Hey, we're going to set up every Saturday and stop all the cyclists and have the Girl Scouts pass out leaflets to say these are our social contracts for using this bike path. Like there is so much education that we need around how we interact with each other in public spaces, especially as we get more people on e-bikes. And I do know that there's this like reaction. They're not even pedaling. Like they should, but they're outside and they're not in a car. And that is a win in my book. If that is a child that is taking himself to school and is outside instead of being in the back of his mom's SUV, that is a win. Like that's a win for society. And if it's a senior who hasn't been on a bike for 15 years because they had knee replacement surgery and now they're on an e-bike, like that's a win. So I would say we want more people outside. We want more people out of cars. We do need to address some of the bad behavior that we're seeing, but we can do that without banning people or forcing people into the street that are still just as vulnerable to vehicle violence. So that's my feeling about bike paths. Regulate the behavior, not the technology, especially because the technology is going to keep changing.
Ellen.
Yeah, hi. So there used to be, I think I'm older than everybody here, there used to be a very vibrant human hybrid vehicle community 25 years ago. And it disappeared as the bikes went to China, and we would get new bikes and then they would be discontinued. They'd get motors and then those motors would be discontinued. Today, if I were buying a new trike and I were older, I would go to Turner's Falls. I think that basically bicycles is still in Turner's Falls. And Dave in that bicycle shop has been selling electric recumbent trikes and bikes for a long time. And you can go out and ride around on a safe road. That's what I would recommend. He's left from the old days. As for myself, I was a fanatic and would be a fanatic. I am a fanatic, in fact, but I can't be a fanatic over bikes. I'm having to focus on other crazy things because it's really impossible to find someone who will take your bike and work on it if you didn't buy the bike from that person. If we're going to do this, we have to have an infrastructure of bike building people and bike fixing people and bike loving people and tinkerers. And I wish the garage in our little town of Petersham, there's room in there for a bike shop if we could find somebody to do it. But so I come to all places. I say, does anybody know somebody who can do this? And I don't think you guys do. But if you ever hear of anybody that could fix my recumbent trike, I would like to know about it. And in terms of batteries, I've had everything. And I would love to have a sodium battery. But as far as I know now, the best thing to have is a lithium iron phosphate because lithium ion can catch fire. Mostly not, but lithium iron phosphate is better, and I would never have anything but that. And I like a throttle myself. So anyway.
Some people do love a throttle. I will say that there are some mobile bike mechanics in the state of Massachusetts. And I know a lot of Bakfiets owners, people who have these giant cargo bikes that can't be transported in a vehicle, have become reliant on these mobile bike mechanics. So there are
Oh,
more and
wow.
more of them. So you can look up mobile bike mechanics. I know there are some in the Valley. There are definitely some in the Boston area. Ellen, you and I live in sort of like the nowhere land
Yeah.
of Massachusetts. So I'm happy to help you find one because I have a
That's
bike that
good.
needs to be
That's
serviced
good.
too.
Yeah, because
So
some
maybe
because
we
it,
can do a 2-for-1.
right. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I will say just one other thing about batteries. Because battery fires come up a lot, and I think it's really important to talk about battery health. Storing your battery at 80% charged is ideal. I also say you should be carrying your battery around like it is a bottle of wine. Like you're not gonna like toss it in the bottom of your purse and clunk it on the floor. You're gonna carry it around like it's a bottle of wine slash your laptop that has like your brain in it. Like you want to be gentle with it. You don't want to leave it in direct sunlight. You want to keep it in like a temperature controlled place. The batteries can catch fire, but there are lots of ways that you can prevent that from happening. First, by buying a quality battery, and then by treating it well. And if you ever drop it or you ever notice that there's a crack in the case, taking it back to wherever you bought it or a good bike store and having them help you replace it is really important. So a little word about battery health there. Yeah. Any other questions?
What are some other questions that you get asked or at the Garlic and Arts Festival that people wanted to know about?
Other questions. I think I built my presentation around all the questions that I get asked. I tried to answer all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, the major question that I get asked is how far can you go? So I always try to tell people like somewhere between 20 and 70 miles. It really depends on your battery and the conditions. The other thing that I always say is like, how long do you actually want to be sitting on a bicycle for? And how many miles do you think you really need to go? Because most people, if you pull up a map of your house and you look within a 5 mile radius of your house, you're going to see that there are a lot of things that you go to all the time. Maybe a grocery store, maybe a restaurant, maybe a friend's house, a house of worship. There are all sorts of things that are right around your house. And so the kind of biking that I do is very practical. So it's a lot of like, I'm going here and then I'm going to be at the library for a few hours while I do this thing. So I can bring my bike battery charger with me and charge the battery inside. So that I think that when people are asking me about range, they're often thinking about it as a recreationalist, like, oh, can I go for a 5 hour recreational ride on a Saturday? But the way that I think about biking is much more practical. Like, I'm going to go to the library and do some work, and then I'm going to come home. So I only really need it to go the 6 miles that it takes me to get to the library. The range thing is something that comes up a lot, but I think that as we talk about bikes for transportation, it's a very different conversation. And I always recommend do the activity. Pull up the map after this and see how many things you could realistically bike to from your house that is within a 5 mile band. And if that feels too much, shrink it to a mile. And then you will eventually, like my thing shrank or grew from a 3 mile radius to anything within 12 miles I could reasonably get to if I had enough time. And like that will happen as your confidence grows. But like and make some commitments to yourself. Like anytime I go to the library, I should be on a bicycle unless I'm going somewhere else afterwards. That kind of helps you build that muscle of turning this into just as natural an action as getting into your car to go somewhere as riding your bike.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Thank you, Laura. This was a wonderful evening for us, and I think it'll be a great resource for people. This will be on the localenergyadvocates.org website with all of our other speakers' webinars, and spread it around. Tell people who are thinking about an e-bike. Here's a really great resource.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Night.
Good